Matthew and Helen had known each other since their high school years. Back then, Matthew had fallen hard for the most stunning girl in class. But when he finally worked up the courage to ask her out, she turned him down, cold. Helen had her eyes set on Paul, one of those confident, rough-around-the-edges guys who ruled the social scene. Now and then, Matthew would catch bits of chatter and knowing smirks from the other girls, all too aware of his one-sided crush on Helen. Throughout high school, she stayed with Paul, never getting Matthew a second glance. After graduation, Matthew threw himself into university and picked up a part-time job to help make ends meet. He had his sights set on building something real, climbing the corporate ladder, one step at a time. Through sheer grit and persistence, he landed a position at an international firm. His hard work didn't go unnoticed. Before long, he was pulling in a solid income, enough to snag a roomy apartment, treat himself to a sleek car, and lend a hand to his parents. Somewhere along the way, he caught the travel bug and started exploring the world, soaking up the energy and inspiration that came with each new place. Fast forward a few years, out of the blue, Matthew got an invite to a high school reunion. Curious, and maybe just a little nostalgic, he decided to go. That night, fate threw a curveball. He bumped into Helen. When her eyes landed on him, she did a double take. He wasn't flashy. His outfit was simple, but everything about him radiated quiet success. They started talking, and before long, Helen was hanging on his every word, clearly fascinated by how his life had turned out. As the evening went on, her tone shifted, flirty, playful, unmistakably interested. They exchanged numbers, and surprisingly, it was Helen who reached out the next day, asking him out for a proper date. Even after all that time, and despite how things had ended in school, Matthew realized something. His old feelings for Helen had never completely disappeared. The choices she'd made in the past, they didn't seem to matter anymore. As adults, Matthew was genuinely thrilled when Helen finally showed an interest in him. Their relationship moved quickly. Helen wasn't one for dragging things out. She knew what she wanted and didn't see the point in playing games. Even though Matthew's parents quietly voiced their concerns about how fast everything was going, the couple tied the knot just 6 months later. They dove headfirst into their new life, jet-setting across countries as Matthew introduced Helen to different corners of the world and their vibrant cultures. Helen was smitten with the whirlwind of new sights and sounds, soaking in every adventure with childlike wonder. But once they settled back home, things began to shift. Helen started taking more days off work, often complaining about not feeling well. Over time, her casual grumbling turned into more frequent remarks about how draining her job was, how underappreciated she felt. Matthew, still head over heels for his wife, couldn't see through her subtle manipulation. Wanting nothing more than to see her happy, he gently suggested she quit and just rest at home. He'd handle the bills, the responsibilities, all of it. And just like that, Helen's vision of a life free of work, wrapped in luxury and comfort, became her new reality. For a while, everything seemed picture perfect. Matthew made sure Helen had everything she could wish for. But things took a turn when he returned from a business trip. Something felt off. Helen didn't greet him with her usual warmth, no wide smile or excited chatter. Instead, she seemed distant, withdrawn, almost cold, and that cut deep. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself she was just in a funk or had a rough few days. Still, that uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him alone. Over the next few weeks, subtle changes crept in. Helen began spending more and more time out with friends, sometimes not getting back until late in the evening. When Matthew gently asked about her comings and goings, she casually explained that her best friend had time off too, and they were simply making the most of it, pampering themselves at salons, squeezing in workouts, going for long, leisurely walks. Then came the day everything shifted. Matthew had an important business meeting downtown, but the morning couldn't have gone worse. He left some key documents at home and showed up late to work, setting the tone for a frustrating day. As he sat stuck in traffic near the restaurant where the meeting was set to take place, trying to update his team over the phone. Something caught his eye, a familiar silhouette through a large window nearby. He looked again. There was Helen, laughing, fully engrossed in conversation with a man Matthew didn't recognize. A sudden rush of jealousy hit him hard. He'd never felt anything like it before. So, this is who she's been spending her time with, he thought bitterly. As traffic slowly crawled forward, Matthew kept a discreet distance and followed them, right into the same restaurant where his own meeting was about to happen. Roughly 10 minutes later, the traffic began to ease, giving Matthew just enough room to slip into a nearby parking space. With a deep breath to steady his nerves, he stepped out of the car and walked toward the restaurant, doing his best to remain inconspicuous. His eyes scanned the room the moment he stepped inside, careful not to draw attention as he searched for Helen. Their table wasn't hard to spot. It sat at a distance from the one reserved for his own meeting, but close enough for him to observe without being noticed. He settled into his seat, but his attention remained glued to her. Every laugh, every glance, every little gesture was seared into his memory. And then, finally, he recognized the man sitting across from her. Paul. The same Paul from high school, the same one Helen had once chosen over him. Matthew's stomach turned. It wasn't just the familiarity, it was the realization that this wasn't a casual meetup. The way Helen leaned in, the way she laughed too hard at his jokes, and especially the way Paul's hand casually slid over her thigh. There was nothing innocent about it. It was betrayal, plain and unvarnished. His instincts screamed at him to storm over, to call them out, to make a scene. But the weight of responsibility pressed down harder. This meeting wasn't one he could afford to jeopardize, not after everything he'd built. So instead, he sat in silence, keeping his composure, while every part of him boiled beneath the surface. One thing became crystal clear. This wasn't a new affair. Their ease around each other, their blatant disregard for boundaries, it all pointed to something long-standing. As painful as it was to watch, Matthew forced himself to stay focused. He turned his attention to the negotiation at hand and executed it flawlessly. Every word sharp, every decision precise. By the time his meeting concluded, Helen and Paul were already gone, having slipped out quickly, as if they too had something to hide. That evening, Matthew returned home with a mind made up. He wasted no time. One by one, he gathered Helen's belongings, every dress, every pair of shoes, every trace of her presence, and packed them into bags. Without a second thought, he loaded them into his car and drove straight to the nearest dump, leaving the bags among heaps of trash. When Helen arrived home later that night, confused and unsuspecting, she found the door bolted shut. She rang the bell, knocked, even called out his name. Eventually, Matthew opened the door just enough to speak. "You're not welcome here anymore," he said calmly. "If you want your things, you can go fight the junkyard dogs for them." At first, she thought he was joking, but the door slammed in her face before she could utter another word. Their marriage ended as swiftly as it began. Divorce papers followed soon after. Thanks to his mother's foresight and insistence on a prenuptial agreement, Matthew retained everything: his home, his finances, his peace of mind. Helen, true to form, never once apologized. There were no tears, no explanations. She simply drifted back to Paul, who by then had begun to stabilize financially. She told him what she'd never told Matthew, that he was the one she'd always loved. But Matthew had come to understand the truth. Helen didn't love people. She loved opportunities. She clung to comfort, not commitment, and would abandon anyone the moment the tides turned. Paul might have felt like the lucky one for winning her back, but Matthew knew better. She hadn't changed. She never would. She was a drifter at heart, always chasing the next best thing. And the moment Paul faltered, she'd vanish again, leaving behind nothing but disappointment. Matthew, now free from illusion, realized he'd lost nothing at all.